in the little things like my daughter smiling or carrying around a chicken, which is just like such a cool thing to see. But yeah, there's just these little moments throughout the day where if I am consumed by the noise, if I'm on my phone, if my mind is trailing off to some internal noise that I've created, I'm missing out on those opportunities.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Embracing Brokenness podcast, where our goal is to engage with all of those willing to venture deeper into their transformational journey with Christ. Here are your hosts and the co-founders of Embracing Brokenness Ministries, Steve and Colleen Adams.
Well, hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I think we're going to call this series, and there's two in the series, The Noise Podcast, or The Noise is Deafening, or how do you hear yourself above the noise of this world? And we're going to talk about it not only from kind of a life nitty-gritty, down and dirty, what it looks like for all of us to try to filter all that out, but we want to know, what is the objective in it? Are we looking to do that to live a better life? Or are we trying to get more connected to our Creator? And I think that's probably the things that most of you would want us to talk about. So if you can see, we're all back around the table again. Katie, Mike, Colleen, myself, welcome again. I want to start by making it really easy. The first question is to ask everybody around the table, how do you describe the noise in your life? I'm looking at you, Katie. You get to start this time.
Yeah.
Noise in your life.
Well, I'll start off by saying I'm a millennial, so I think I can. Let me just remind you.
Okay.
So I think I can speak for a lot of people my age that social media is a huge external noise, very loud in our lives. And so, intentional or not, social media influences us in big ways. So I'd say that is a deafening external noise in my life. It's such a subconscious thing to be scrolling through Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, any of the social media platforms, and you're catching bits and pieces of someone's life, but not the whole picture.
Right.
And really what that has done to me through a lot of self-reflection, even in preparation for this podcast episode, is it has caused me to compare, go into a lot of different things where I feel like I'm not measuring up, I'm not good enough, other people's lives are better. So intentional or not, it really does influence how I view my own life and hearing from God.
Yeah, there's a lot that interferes. I think that's a really valid point when we think about even just going out in public today. Now, I grew up in a time when there was no such thing as social media. Social media was us going out and actually talking to each other and interacting and having a conversation. It wasn't on a device that you held in front of you, because these screens have taken up a predominant amount of time. I think the statistics are staggering. I think it's, for the average person, especially even your age or younger, it's like 6 hours a day at least. And there are times I go on and look at my screen time, and a lot of it has to do with the ministry, and it's 3 or 4 hours a day. And I intentionally cut that back. But it is noise, and the algorithms are crazy because they just continue to drag you through the muck and mire of the things that you're interested in, aren't they? Yeah. That's great. That's so perfect. That's a great opening point. Probably the most important that we deal with even as a society today. Thanks. Any lines?
Yeah, noise for me is a lot for if we're talking like external noise.
Yeah,
is mostly work.
Oh,
work demands and just the busyness of the calendar.
Yeah,
those demands that pull me away from the quiet and the things that I really need to thrive. That can show itself up. I mean, that can show in the time. It's so hard to keep work in its place. Because it's a nonstop demanding animal, it needs to, and then, but that also brings, anxiety or stress or other things that just bleed into the other hours of the day if you're not careful. And then there are a lot of other good things, other ministry opportunities, or spending time with family, or that also demand attention. So, like, that's my big noise problem. That's my biggest.
And just identifying the noise is the first place. Like, I think we can get pulled into a way of life where it just becomes routine. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, so what, I'm on my phone or my device for 5 hours a day. It's just part of the day. Not a big deal. Or I get sucked into work. And I remember back in the days when I was had my own business, and it would be 7 days a week sometimes.
Yeah.
At least 6 anyway. I try to take the 7th off, but not always. And it was constant because the demands are there. They're always there in one way or another. And you don't have to be in your own business. It's a dog eat dog world.
Yeah.
It is like we're trying to clamber our way to the top, and that requires a lot of us. And so do the people we work for require a lot of us sometimes, especially in this country. It tends to be work ethic first, performance, all of that.
Yep.
I would have to say there's two things really, and being in ministry now, it's really changed. But the very first one is what John Eldridge calls the spirit of the age, which is busyness. And I think that was really true of my life when I was working for someone else, and just, it was all consuming. But I would say now that I don't have that pressure and have a lot of more choice in how I spend my time, it's actually my intellectual curiosity meets the amount of information that's available. And so for me as an ADD person, that's a nightmare, because I used to say, when Google came out, I said they made this just for me, because I can't let something sit. If somebody says something, I'm like, yeah, well, what do you know about that? Well, I don't really know much, but I know I have to be on Google immediately trying to find out. And as soon as I get on Google to find out that one thing, there's these other things coming up, and it's good stuff, right? Like, I think for Christians, the amount of Christian information that is out there is actually a huge distraction. Yeah. But you can justify it because I'm like, I'm not on social media, I'm not doing, but I'm just going to the next, I want to hear what they have to say, or what they may have, and forget it. Well, I can be lost for 8 hours in information.
Well, it used to be Ask Jeeves.
I know, I love Jeeves.
Oh my gosh.
The internet.
I'm looking at Katie. Wait, again, she does not know what I'm
Jeeves,
talking about.
Vaguely.
Exactly.
Yeah, you were probably like Reagan's age when Jeeves came out.
Pre-Google. But imagine the time in which you'd actually have to go to a library and look at bookshelves full of books, and there was the Dewey Decimal System. Well, then if you wanted to go really back, you have to get microfiche.
Yeah.
He has no idea what that is.
Go pull up that newspaper from 40 years ago. And
so research looked a lot different, which you're right, because it's at our fingertips. Bunny trails all over the place. It's crazy. For me, we talk about some external noise. I'll just mention the internal noise. For me, a lot of times is getting into a conversation with myself, right? About, the story I'm telling myself about any set of circumstances that might exist. Right? How many times have we had conversations with ourselves about what we're going to say in an upcoming, there's podcasts, but there's also conversations or conflict or, just things that we, even doesn't have to be conflict. It can be, how am I going to solve a problem at work? Like, I'm going to meet a client. You had a 2-hour meeting yesterday. What does that look like? And how do I prepare for that? And there's noise in that. Noise, the internal, right? Did you struggle with some things even in that preparation? Did you, right? So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So for that's just another layer on top of the external stuff.
And isn't it, I think this is crazy. So we live in such a fast-paced world now. Busyness is huge. Research at our fingertips. Something as simple as like a common cold. Well, let me just research what this could be. So then you look up like runny nose. And before you know it, the diagnosis is very bad, and the prognosis is terrible.
Oh, yeah.
So just like that, this little external noise of research and information now flips to internal noise of what is the narrative that we're telling ourselves.
Right.
Now we've just unlocked a whole level of wounds that we now need to address because of one little external noise flipping.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah.
There's so many ways to go from there, but you're because all the things, the records that have been playing in the past impact the internal noise, and then we get reaffirmed with our noise from the rest of the world telling us that we're not good enough, and all the things that we struggle, things we talk about a lot around here in this ministry. Add more to it. What else?
I mean, I think most of our internal dialogue, I can speak for me, is usually when I kind of get stuck in that internal noise, it's fear-based.
Okay, yeah.
And when I really look at fear in the way Satan meant to use fear, because it's the opposite of love, right? And it is the most commanded thing that we not fear. It is interesting that fear a lot of times will connect with people pleasing or performance, some of the things that God wants to root out in our life. But we get there and it's like being on a hamster wheel. It just keeps going and going and going. And so usually I think for me, it's, did I let somebody down? Is this going to be good enough? Just like crazy stuff that's nothing to do with our identity as child of God. So that's for me where a lot of internal noise, I think, has come from in the past.
Anything come to mind?
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Being a lot of it is fear-based. And it doesn't always present itself that way initially. You just feel a certain way or you think a certain way. But after you start peeling away the layers of the onion, like for years and years, my internal conversation of the noise that I had to fight through was, I can't miss it. Like I can't. I have to be so thorough, so connect every dot, see the end from the beginning. And that is a lot of noise. That is a lot of drive and energy. That's for what? When you start peeling away, it's a fear of failure. I would never have said that. I would never have been able to articulate that. But I think also like our self-perceptions, what were our early formative experiences like? How do we define ourselves? That also is a lot of noise. That isn't necessarily true, doesn't reflect reality.
When it's a lot of noise that the enemy can use to play those broken records, because I think the noise of the broken records that need to be silenced are huge internal noise. For sure.
So I want to go to another level even. Think about this noise. Okay, we live in a world at war, not just spiritually speaking, but physically. The reality is, just look. Okay, so there's politics, which we don't have to get into, but there's wars going on there. There's a divided country that exists not only here, but in many ways around the world. There's noise going on. Just look at the war that are happening that we are aware of. You have an invasion of Ukraine from Russia. You have a terrible set of circumstances over in Gaza right now, where the state of Israel is targeted as a nation. There are and retaliation is going on. There's fear behind it because we know, as believers, all of us, maybe not everybody listening, but we have a perspective, from Genesis to Revelation that said there's a greater story here that's being told. We know that Jesus is coming, and then you have the prophets, I won't call air quotes in some sense, but people that are being called sort of to remind us all that the end is near. Right? And so for those in society, they're not ready to hear that. That's noise. Even Christians are like, wait, there's more to do. Hold on, wait, don't, not really, is that it? We don't want to be left behind, but we also know that God's called us into this next season of our life. It's why we're sitting around the table, right? We're all here because we believe God has given us a message to the nations, not just here. We have people listening to this podcast around the world. We know that. Okay, so it's not just the United States. How do we sort that? How do we sort that? Again, technology is what brings us the information today. It's a
Yeah.
great thing.
Yeah.
But
Well, the 24-hour news cycle, when that happens, I think it changed our world, that we can see things were always going on,
yes,
but we just didn't know about them. And now it's like you can get information on anything and get alerts about it. And so the awareness of how evil is really progressing, it just sabotages us, I think.
now I'm going to go another layer because we're introducing all the noise. And if anybody has anything they want to jump in with here, but let's just talk about AI. Let's talk about deep fakes. For anybody that knows what that means right now, there are people on the internet right now, very influential people, that are highly concerned about the fact that their image and likeness has been reproduced and selling things. I'm going to name names, but I recently, probably the #1 podcaster in the world, brought up this issue of, and there's nothing to do legally. They can't track down the origins. So think about the noise that's going to happen around the social media platforms in our lives that'll influence people to think other than the truth of what we know, especially from a biblical worldview, other than what we know to be true, and then alter our behavior as a result of deep fake, artificial intelligence. Okay, so I think about the good things that are available with AI. We use some of it to help sort some things, even in the ministry, but not our words. We're here having a conversation. This is important. It can be really intimidating, especially for kids.
Yeah.
I mean, you got kids that are going to be influenced by this growing up. It's one more layer. Sorry, Mom.
This is great. Great for my anxiety.
I know, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot. There's a lot for us to try to pick through around noise, but we can be assured that the gospel cuts through the noise. The gospel, we say oftentimes, is good news, but it's actually something, when you go back to the original, it is good proclamation. It's not just news, it's a proclamation of the truth of who Jesus is in our life, and to share that. And we have to cut through that noise. We don't. The Holy Spirit cuts through the noise when we're assigned to bring the message. So now I'm going to ask the question and stop talking and let you guys talk a little bit more. How does that noise affect your ability to hear from God?
Well, that's the exact thing. There is no quiet. Like we need to have the quiet to hear Him. Taking to with my noise being a competing time issues. That's my #1 priority. So if I don't take that time, if I submit to the noise and I get lost in that traffic, I have less time to spend with Him, less time reading, less time listening and feeding, my spirit, my soul, and that will start to show up, if I'm not taking care of things.
I think the more I listen to the noise, the harder it is to unwind from everything that the noise creates, whether that's anxiety, people pleasing, fear-based decisions, performance-based decisions. The more, for me, because I'm home with the kids most of the time, a lot of it is social media. It has a huge impact on me. So if I'm spending a lot of time on social media, not seeing the whole picture of somebody's life, yet creating false narratives in my head of what their life looks like, and I'm filling in all the gaps that I'm not seeing, it takes a lot of work for me to come out of that. And even just flipping the script and thinking about what I post for family and friends to see on Facebook. I've been doing just once a month photo dumps of my kids and my dogs and my chickens.
Yes, we've seen that. Love the chickens.
It's just a way for me to share little life updates with people, although I don't post a message at all.
Right.
And I think it was February, I did a photo dump. And February was a really hard month for me for a lot of reasons. But some good, some bad, but just a challenging month. And none of that was conveyed in my pictures.
Huh.
And somebody that I hadn't seen in a little while came up to me one day and said, "It seems like everything's going really well," or from what I see on Facebook. And
Oh,
I
wow.
was thinking, no, you know,
Wow.
it's just really hard, you know?
Yeah.
And it reminded me, wow, I played a part in that,
Mhm.
you know, in the noise for somebody else. That doesn't mean that I have to stop posting on Facebook,
Mhm.
but it really made me think about, what am I doing? And it reminded me that it is important for me to share the hard things too. If I'm going to be on a platform like that, it was challenging and encouraging to hear that.
Mm.
So yeah, I think for me, it's also reflecting on how I contribute to the noise for other people.
It's a great point. Yeah, I hadn't really thought of it in that way, but we have to challenge ourselves to, I don't know, like, what are we hiding if we are? But at the same token, the thing that I do appreciate about social media, it's why I even got on Facebook originally, was because I have friends and family all over the country, and it's not that easy to pick up the phone. Yes, you can text and all that, but you get to see what life looks like. Michael's done a great job. He stayed off Facebook. Way to go, bravo.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah. Within the last 7 or 8 years, maybe.
Yeah. And so it is tempting to project something different than what exists in our lives.
Yeah.
And AI again, it's going to make it even more challenging, because you're not sure whether you're looking at the people that you thought you knew something about showing up even more differently than they can. You imagine, how in the world is that going to happen? But it'll happen once it gets more sophisticated. Yeah, I think that's great points. Great points. So I said hearing from God, and it is hearing Him even in those moments where we're not authentic. A lot of this does interfere with the hearing piece of who we are in Him, and what He wants to share with us in our lives.
Yeah.
But I think that He's always, as we were talking, I was thinking back to, was it Elijah who ran into the cleft of the rock?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the God was clearly not in any of the noise.
Right.
The storm passed, the fire passed, and it was when the quiet breeze came, He covered His face.
Still small.
Yeah.
And He was running from a great victory.
Yes,
right before that.
Yeah.
With the prophets of Baal.
And why was He running? Because of more noise.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. He was afraid.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
But fear.
I had noise that triggered the fear.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, there's a great lesson in that, because we do. Then there's the opposite, right? We hide from it.
Mm.
Yeah, we hide from
And I think, going to the Bible, Jesus came incarnationally to show us how to live out the kingdom, to live out what God has called us to, and there's never been as much noise as there is today because of all the sources of information stuff. But isn't it interesting, even in His time, He had to get away. Of course, He did have large crowds of people gathering and things, but He totally took Himself away to silence, to be with the Father. And so that's and I'm sure He could have connected any time with the Father. He knew how to abide and get there, and yet He walks away from everything. And I think, for me, many times, because I'm walking with the Lord, asking questions as we're going about things on behalf of somebody else, like when we're doing ministry and things, I can sometimes falsely believe that I've really spent my time with the Lord because we're working for Him. He's included in the work. And all of a sudden I'll go, man, it's just been so cool. But it's not necessarily on my behalf. It's not our relationship that He's looking to say, are you really willing to come away with me? And that noise, even though it appears good, is it's not good, because it is a distraction to us really connecting in with Him.
Well, and Jesus is the model.
Yep.
I mean, the way He did, even after the demands that were placed on Him, disciples couldn't understand. Wait, don't go. These people need you.
Right.
I need time with the Father. Like the
Yeah.
Father is what's going to provide the respite, the kind of refilling, refreshing that allows us to minister out of the overflow.
Yep.
I think you talked about your prayer and a timer, because that's how crazy it can get sometimes, because you're trying to manage and negotiate with little ones who don't have schedules. They don't have their calendar on their phone to leave mommy alone at noon.
Yeah.
Okay, so boom,
they're
they
only on 8 to 5.
yeah, 8 to 5. I
Their
got.
negotiation power is just to have a temper tantrum. That's their power, and it's powerful.
So you're saying they're noisy?
Yeah, it is powerful.
They're noisy too? Yeah.
A little bit.
A little bit. Well, I get the day off today.
Yeah, exactly.
Here you are with us. Yeah, well, hubby is taking care.
Yeah,
That is.
And if he hears this, he did a very nice job on the girl's
Yes.
hair.
Yes. Way to go. Way to go.
We saw it. We approve. Good job.
Yeah. But there are so many things that do interfere with our ability to get quiet. I just think, I made a note. It's kind of interesting. You brought it up earlier about the comparison thing, but because for me in my life, most of it was that performance. Those issues of whether it be in sports or academia, whatever it is, I just learned to live with the noise that came even from the enemy. It is really good at cluttering our brains with noise. We talk about agreements, the things that we believe to be true that aren't really true, and we align with them, even though the enemy has a different truth that he wants to share about us in our ear. Sometimes it's half truths. Sometimes it's like, oh wait, yeah, but what does Jesus say about that? We're not hearing that because of the records brought about earlier playing. False narratives, I guess, in our brain. What else, you guys? Like interference.
I think for me, just along the lines of the false narratives that I've had in my head, when I was in college, I was going to go to school to major in Spanish. And I don't know why I chose that major, but I thought that was what I wanted. And a professor sat down with me. He led the international business department. And he said, you would be really good in international business. And I was like, okay. So I switched my major, and I look back on that decision was made out of how someone else valued me and thought that I would bring value to something like the international business department. I don't have regrets for doing it, but I see how that decision was made out of performance driven anxiety, people pleasing especially, but just I don't think that I looked at it in light of who is God and who did he make me to be. And if I had really seeked him in that, keeping in mind what the professor was saying, but not allowing it to rule my decisions and my life, I might have made a different decision. But yeah, where I'm at now is completely different than international business. And even my career path went a very different direction quickly. So I wasn't in it that long. But it is just interesting to think about now that I sit in a different kind of noise and by myself a lot with the kids. It's just really reflecting on some of those times that I did make a decision based on the noise that I was hearing.
Wow.
Well, we're willing to redeem part of that for international ministry, maybe. So there could be maybe something.
Do business's mission.
That's right. That's right. We're going to see what God will do with that anyway, because even when we make decisions that aren't quite all aligning, he somehow redeems them. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah. Michael, what do you have over there on this right?
Well, I think that, to kind of piggyback on what Katie was talking about, like in my world, it's the internal noise that leads to the worst consequences. And I think that it's almost as if there's a strategy involved with all of the deception and all of the noise that we have, and they work in tandem. So
Yeah.
you talk about the media and the things that are going out there, all of the deception with AI. It's, hey, you know, we're going to create a lot of noise. We're going to create a lot of chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And here, pay attention to that.
Yes.
Inside, we have a whole other set of deceptions and a set of, you know, for whatever reason,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's trauma, maybe it's just circumstances of life.
Yeah.
We have our little framework, and or we have a lack of some kind, or, you know, something that's driving and creating all kind of noise, and that's what we're listening to. And out of that comes all kinds of decisions that we make that, you know, we have to rely on redemption.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, maybe someday some good will come of this, or, you know, or you know, maybe not. But
Yeah.
As an internal processor myself, it's the internal dialogues and the internal noise is the most challenging.
I appreciate that. From external processors over here on this side of the table, we appreciate that. You're a bit of an internal processor, Katie?
I think I'm a little bit of both.
Both?
Actually,
Okay.
because I mean, Colleen and I are still unpacking some of this. I've been going through some unpacking of my value issues since like October, I think it's been. And Colleen and I continue to have conversations around what that looks like. You know, me placing my value on external things. So yeah, I think I'm still unpacking a lot of external noise, but it does convert to internal noise in a lot of ways, because that's the continued conversation of what you're observing externally and how you carry that with you internally, and really how that can go back to your childhood. And that's some of what we're digging up with me, just understanding how different things in my childhood equaled these false narratives of having issues with my value, maybe not seeing myself as a child of God, a daughter of a king, you know.
Well, I was always taught that you should not bring a problem to light without a solution. So let's move a little bit over to the side of, well, how do we sort of navigate the reality that we're dealing with a ton of noise? You know, this whole thing, the noise is deafening is what I said earlier, but what I didn't say is the way we'll tag this, but first God. Okay, so but first God means, okay, got it. How are we to sort of, I don't know, are there practices? Is there something we can do this side of heaven? Right? For those of you who didn't tune in last time, we had a lot of conversation about how our vocation matters for eternity. You know, return to the garden is something that we've talked about around here before, and we look forward to, but we have a little bit of time between now and then to sort out what do we do with all of it. So what I'd like to hear from each of you guys, you know, then we'll kick it to Colleen to kind of wrap some things. Do you have practices to neutralize the noise? And if you do, what are they? And what's worked, what hasn't worked, to try to, you know, deal with that? So
I can start.
Go for it.
It's been really hard for me to get away and quiet the noise completely lately. My second daughter is up all hours of the night.
Wow.
We have a puppy. My 4.5-year-old shows up in our room at 3 a.m. and she's there the rest of the night. So there's not a whole lot of time to have quiet, and when it is quiet, I'm very tired. So I think for me, the first thing is to unplug a little bit. So put my phone down, put it in a place that's far away from me, that I'm not just picking it up and looking at it. Maybe I'll put it in my room and we'll go outside, so it's not even within reach. The second thing is to get the word in my space. So I can't just go to the Bible and read through a chapter. I have my Bible out and my girls are all over it, and I'm like, please don't rip the pages, you know. But yeah, so it's very hard to be sitting in the Word when there's so much going on around me. So I think bringing the word in my space, whether that's writing a verse or part of a verse up on my mirror, or writing it down on a notepad and just putting it in the kitchen, so that throughout the day I'm looking at those things and just putting the noise in its rightful place. Not that I can get rid of the noise completely, but just keeping my heart in check with what God says. And thirdly is just being aware of God kisses, which we talk about are just moments throughout the day where God is pouring his blessings on us.
Yeah.
So in the little things like my daughter smiling or carrying around a chicken, which is just like such a cool thing to see. But yeah, there's just these little moments throughout the day where if I am consumed by the noise, if I'm on my phone, if my mind is trailing off to some internal noise that I've created, I'm missing out on those opportunities to see God kissing us, God wanting to pour his blessings on us.
So good.
So
Thanks for that. That is so helpful. Yeah, that's great advice. Write that down if you didn't write it down, folks. Those are good ones. Or replay. Michael.
From the external perspective, what has helped me is just getting into the disciplines, the spiritual disciplines, taking time. Like Katie said, you got to take time, find the time somehow, carve it out for really concentrated scripture reading, because the truth is a wall against a lot of noise. And prayer, fasting, really spending time, like it's that communion with him, which we can always, also pray without ceasing. Like we can always have that connection going, but there's something about having that time, even if it's just a few minutes of a day, just to spend with him, connect, hear. But on the internal side, those disciplines are going to yield results there as well, because all the deception has to be measured against something. Like all information has to be measured against something. What is real? What is not? What is true? What is not? I'm going to put a plug in for getting into the healing stream to deal with the things that if you find yourself walking through the spiritual disciplines, but you find yourself I still kind of gravitate towards this kind of thought patterns, or I gravitate toward this kind of behavioral patterns, no matter what I've been in the Word for a long time, and I just keep doing the same things, or the same kind of noise comes back that's always so strong. Follow those threads and see there might be some things underlying there. You'd be surprised at how quiet it gets when you start getting rid of some of those. Maybe there are agreements that you've made in some areas, like you've set your life up to believe something that isn't true about God or yourself. You'd be surprised at how much quieter it gets inside when you don't have all that noise blaring. You're quicker to hear, you're quicker to believe the truth or see the right things, and you're not overwhelmed with the false.
You're quicker to say, "Get behind me, Satan," because I know that is not God's voice. I love that.
Yes, I'm going to pick up on that, because I just a practice that I got into early on, just a couple months ago, that was really helpful for me. What you're referring to is something that a neuroscientist that I've kind of connected with a little bit, someone that is a believer, and brings a tremendous amount of knowledge from the scientific side into the faith piece. She calls those things toxic thoughts. And so these toxic thoughts need to be brought into submission, if you will, to God, to the Holy Spirit, to those things. What I started to do, because I had plenty of toxic thoughts, I had no idea. Like it just got really bad. I found myself in the morning almost dreading getting out of bed. This is, I shared this with you a little bit, and I almost felt like it was a form of depression. I'm not a person that has experienced that, so I'm not sure how to if I'm putting the right label on it, but I said, something has to change. And it's as if God dropped this in my lap. And it's an app that I downloaded, and it really is about mind management. Okay, now this isn't like weird stuff here. Okay, just you know, you don't want to. You're not. I'm not going into some ultra weird space because it's all scripturally based. It's meditative practices. It's about getting your mind submitted to God and in a place where you can hear. And so she would walk me through, and you know, it's an app. You walk you through the process every morning. I did it for 21 days, and then extended to 63 in a lighter fashion. And it is truth. You can rewire your brain.
Yes.
This is all about, you know, neuroplasticity. The science behind it is real, and it's God's creation, so it's not hocus pocus. There are ways that we can rewire our thinking, and it has to do with, you know, meditate, like, you know, we can have the mind of Christ. We can know what he's thinking. Paul's told us this over and over again. We can see it in Scripture. It's there in black and white, and it's real in our lives. And I began to experience this thing I never thought before, because she said, "Look, you've got to get back to the origin story."
Yeah.
You know, we call it the on the tree of brokenness. If anybody see that, it's on the homepage of our website. Scroll down, getting to the roots of the cause behind why all this takes place, and we are from a broken world in a broken state, and we have to heal those spaces in our lives. And to your point, so this became a really cool exercise for me, my wife will attest to it. It flipped the script entirely. Like I was able to rewire these toxic thoughts that I couldn't get rid of, and part of them were, and God took me back to some stories in my past that had to be dealt with, that I just was not believing, especially about. We knew we were in a huge transition here in the ministry. We're starting to go really heavy into the prison side of the population. You know, we had worked with those experiencing homelessness for years, and now we're in prison ministry, and we're on front line.
Yeah.
Like really going after it.
Yeah.
The truth, bringing it to people. Talk about setting the captives free,
Yes.
literally and figuratively. And so I knew part of this was a spiritual battle.
Yeah.
And for anyone that's not sure, there are plenty of resources out there. There's another app that I use that I'm not afraid to say. It's the Abide app that you know that you can just sit quietly and allow someone else to ask you the questions, because we don't always know the questions to ask ourselves.
Yeah.
That makes sense? Like we just don't always know that. So get in the presence of the Lord and let somebody else walk you through it.
Yeah.
The narrative, like walk you through it. And all of a sudden, these Abide, it's every day. I'm like, oh yeah. And it's funny how God coordinates my brain activity with the message that I just happen to tune in for the day, or the scripture that I'm reading, or, you know, we're listening to the Bible in a year. We've been doing it for years. And all of a sudden something pops up. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's perfect. Yeah. Even though it might happen back in Deuteronomy, and you're like, what? Or Numbers. Really? Okay. Like, I didn't expect that. Or Leviticus or something. Like, what? You know, we talked about Elijah, you know, huge. The Bible is so full of examples of way God's want to heal our brains, our minds, our hearts.
Yeah, good time.
All right, take a big breath. Carl, you have some thoughts on this, because I know so in case anybody knows, Colleen was trained as a counselor, spent a lot of time working with people with trauma. With significant wounds in their lives, and you have created, this is really cool, God has downloaded some things to you in how to sort of picture this in your mind and our mind. So share with us some of the things that you would how do we deal with the battle of the noise in our life?
Yeah. So I do. I think God has worked on questions that I've had. One of my frustrations in church, it has been like, we say all these cliche things, like, well, if you're abiding in Christ, or perfect love casts out fear. All of those things tend to move us to performance. Like, I better find the scripture to meditate on because I'm having fear. And the reality is, so much of this, you know, when God tells us that, you know, the yoke is light, it's because he's doing the work. The hardest thing for us to figure out is how to get in a posture to abide, and even how to look at what did the enemy really mean in certain kinds of brokenness. And so interesting is you're talking about, you know, neuroplasticity. we have so much data today, scientifically, secular science, which quite frankly, science actually came about because of Christians looking at the laws of God in the universe. So there is not a sacred secular divide. That's kind of a revisionist history, because all of the best scientists that we know of, like Newton, actually were Christians. So I love when science brings together what the Bible tells us. And so, when we think about neuroplastically, what is happening in our brain, and it starts, from the fall, is we activate the survival mechanism in our brain, and it's the hippocampus and the amygdala. We'll put these visuals up for you to see, but we were not created in the garden to activate fear at any level. We were fully, perfectly abiding in God. And that's how perfect love casts out fear. Right. So the posture for us is not to figure out how to abide. It's to say, okay, Lord, transform me back to your image in the garden where I could fully abide. And so like what Michael is saying is part of that process. So what the Lord had just really given me at one point was to take the brain so people could understand what is happening in the brain. Most people say, oh, well, you're saved, so these things should not be a part of you. No, salvation gives us the ability to enter the transformational journey, which is a journey that will go on until the new heaven and the new earth. It's just a continuum that we're to live in. And so what I love that what God gave me was, this visual of, in the garden, there was no fear. There was no active survival region in the brain, and perfect love was there. And then you see this picture of the fall, and the consequences of the fall is where we have a superhighway in our brain to love in the garden. That love is completely immediately torn down, and we have a superhighway to fear. So we are actually programmed. The world system programs us to fear. So we have a job to do, and that is to deprogram the world and reprogram the kingdom. And so, again, a lot of the tools that we use in Embracing Brokenness are a part of doing that. And even what you did was an absolute part of doing that. So as you look at the next pictures, you see this superhighway that's going to fear, and the journey, once we're reborn, and our spirit's reborn, we still have a superhighway, almost a superhighway to fear. We just have the possibility for the first time to start taking that apart. And you can see in these different images that it's only through really addressing personal brokenness, which only 3% of the population, Barna says, is happening, that you actually can fully abide and actually change this pattern. So I think we've got to teach people to transform. Personal brokenness, meaning we've got to break up with the false self. Like, we've got to understand, which means we fully have to understand who God is to understand that definition. We have to break up with sin, which is not necessarily that we're going to always be perfect, but we're surrendering and finding a place in God where he conquers it for us. And part of that is doing the journey of, where are these records coming from telling me things that are just not true about who I am, and they preoccupy me. And then finally, as you start to see love come up, it's creating this superhighway. Eventually it reaches a tipping point, and we can actually fulfill what God calls us to, which is love God, love others. And you see us returned back to the garden in our brain, which is the place where we get control over some of this. And so I love that God gave me that image. I will say the other image that he gave me that I find really powerful is really, again, this focus on sin is an operating system like in your computer. I mean, your computer is in the background doing things. If you get an error, it's probably because this new program isn't necessarily working with the old system, or so it's the operating system that we don't think about. Well, our kingdom operating system of Shalom was replaced with the world system, which has this fear component. And so part of our job in transformation is surrendering constantly till the world system is replaced with the kingdom. And again, we don't get saved and all of a sudden, oh, we have this new operating system. You have the possibility to defeat the world system, where if your spirit is not awakened, you don't have that possibility. So kind of this image to just kind of represent that is, the image of pre-fall and transformed. We were fully, this is abiding, fully meant to be connected to God, almost like an umbilical cord is in the womb, fully connected and dependent on the mother. And so think about that. You've got this child in the womb who is fully dependent. Well, that was us in the garden, fully dependent, and we could just be kids and God could be dad, and, he was looking out for everything for us. And so his spirit told us how our emotions should be, right? Because we didn't have all this disruption. They told us how our emotional state would be. And so we're perfectly calm because God's got it all under control. Mm-hmm. And that actually told our body, our senses, how to take in the world, right? So our sight, our, just all of our senses. So Spirit of God informs our soul, informs our physical senses. Well, what happens in the fall? Satan's, temptation is great because physically, sure, we start dying, but it's the spiritual death that happens immediately. So think about that little baby in the womb who all of a sudden the umbilical cord is just completely cut off, has no ability to connect to the mother, which was its complete substance, and now has to survive outside the womb with no connection to the mother. Well, that's what happens. Our spirit, dies, and you can see that in this post-fall lens. So we naturally, instead of saying we can take in from the spirit, we are born into a world at war, and the only way we can interpret is from our senses, the body, into our soul. So that outside world system, which is evil and corrupt, is how we take in the world now. And what that does to our soul and our emotional state is complete disruption. We live like that as believers, right? Like, because we haven't had that system replaced. And this journey, which shows you the journey of transformation, really is about returning to the kingdom and the Spirit of God, being so connected, just like an umbilical cord, being so connected to God that the Spirit, once again, tells our emotions how to feel, tells our physical how to take in the senses. And I would say during COVID, watching the condition of the church's reaction, which to me was just really disappointing because fear reigned in so many situations. I went, we don't get what transformation really looks like. We don't really get what abiding looks like, because if we were abiding, COVID would have been a huge opportunity to just really spread shalom and the love of God, and not say, what's in this for me? I'm afraid. What about me? And so this kind of picture, as I was wrestling with some of that, was like, wow, like this journey is about doing the work. There is huge benefit to us. And so, some of this work goes together. When you're connected to God's Spirit, you describe kind of the noise settles. Connected to God's Spirit, it doesn't matter, what crisis we're in, what kind of suffering we're in, because his Spirit produces joy in us. Just like in Jesus, the joy set before him to actually endure the cross is the joy that we can experience the worst chaos and hardship and noise, because that's what his Spirit does. And so,
well, and we were just talking yesterday. We're driving and we're hearing more news around the world, the chaos, the noise, and we're saying, well, gee, this could really distract us from the things that really matter. We're not called to and for instance, we're not world leaders. We're not called to change policy or to do anything other than to spread the shalom, the cultural mandate, to be whatever God's called us to be, all of us sitting around the table.
To make God's name great so people forget about us.
Yeah. Because it's not about that. And the noise tends to distract us from the mission.
Yep.
And I think you've summed it up well, because we have little individual lives, and we get a slice of time that we call the short-term missions trip we're on to make it an impact. Now, many part of our lives, sitting around this table, even was not that. It was more about like, how do I survive in this nonsense? Let alone even project God's image, which is what He's called us to do as believers. And so we know our calling. It took me a little while in life to finally get to the point where, like, hey, this doesn't really matter. All this other noise, all the stuff going on around us isn't really that critically important in the overall scheme of the world that we live in.
Amen.
Those things will all be taken care of. God has his He didn't fall asleep on the throne.
No.
He's still there. He's still in control, and we have a part. We just have a part in the greater story.
Amen. That's
So
not
maybe
our story.
we just gotta filter out the noise. Put on the earmuffs. Put on the, I don't know, maybe it's a headset, maybe it is meditation, whatever it is for each of us, and just let God reign and rule.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, landing the plane right here is pretty important. There's a lot that we cover.
Yeah.
Okay. And for many of you out there, we just really hope it was helpful to have this conversation around the table openly. We don't have it all together by all means, but we found things, practices, we found situations in our relationship with the Lord that has made it just a little more palatable and filtering of all this other stuff that's going on around us, whether it's social media or our career, job responsibilities. It's even parenting to some degree. We're going to get into that in our next podcast. Whether it's just the stuff of life that we now understand scientifically, how God wired us to be able to cope in a world that's gone mad. Literally, it's gone mad.
Yes.
In case you haven't noticed. So thanks again, guys. It was great to have the conversation. Our team, we're getting together every so often to be able to do this sort of thing. So stay tuned. There's going to be more.
Yes.
Next podcast, Katie and Colleen are going to sit down. We're off the set. So, and they're going to talk a little bit about what's the noise look like in the world of parenting. And for many of you who are parents, we all, I guess, had them or we wouldn't be here, but not everyone is parenting right now. But this is going to be a really important conversation. So come back, tune in, share this with anybody that it might matter to. So blessings to you all. Thanks again, guys. Good to have you with us. Blessings to you.
This was another episode of the Embracing Brokenness podcast. For more information on Embracing Brokenness Ministries, or to subscribe to our blog, podcast, YouTube channel, or engage with us on social media, please visit our website at embracingbrokenness.org. Thanks for joining us.